And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 273. Today we're talking about texture. How can we get that sense of touch, feel into a flat two-dimensional photo? That's really what we're going to be exploring. If you're watching live, leave a comment, let me know you're here, and we can make a start. Yes, and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 273. We're here live on YouTube, so if you happen to be watching live, that is, leave a comment, let me know where you are, let me know what the weather's doing. We can get the chat started. If you're not watching live, you can still leave a comment. Just bear in mind that if you comment at any point through the podcast, I won't necessarily know what you're referring to. So if you are referring to something specific, then leave a little reference note to it. But yes, leave comments, click like, subscribe, all the usual kind of stuff you can do as well. Today we're going to be talking about the notion of texture in photography, and it's a really important aspect. So we're going to be kind of deep diving into that. At the moment, I see we've got a couple of people in already. So let's do a quick few hellos and then we can get on. So April joins us, says, greetings from a mostly cloudy day in Long Island, New York. John Harvey says hello from mid-Ohio, where it is warmer but wet. Susan says hi from a very wet, miserable day in Kukubri. It has warmed up a bit, though, to the dizzy heights of 7 degrees. 7 degrees! I'm impressed. I think we're still only on about 4 or 5 here in Castle Douglas. But yes, here, that's a couple of miles down the road to Susan's. And it is it's just, it's cold, it's wet, it's windy, it's just awful. It's not fun at all, really. Yes. And Nicola also says hello from it's wet and miserable and dark near Castle Douglas. And Nicola is pretty much about equidistance between me and Susan. Nadia's joined us from a cloud wet Fife. That's about 100 miles, maybe 150 miles north from here. Depends whether you're going as the crow flies or the car drives. Or if you're going via the train, then it's probably about 200. Yes, so we have people, we have a podcast topic, so we can make a start. So yes, what we're talking about today then is the notion of texture. So VG set this one. VG, having won the Smug Points challenge for December, means that she got to choose the topic for January. And what she suggested was the notion of texture. And it's an interesting one, texture. And it kind of part of the thing about texture is we're also tapping into a whole load of really what photography is about. Because ultimately, photography is this two-dimensional, flat, still image. We experience the world through 4 dimensions. With 3 spatial dimensions plus 1 temporal dimension, which we move through time. Photography, on the other hand, exists in 2 dimensions. So not only are we lacking depth, we're lacking that movement as well. So we've lost half the amount of dimensions before we even start when it comes to somehow representing the world out there through photography. But on top of that, it's not just a case of dimensions, it's the experience. We don't have any of the senses beyond sight. We don't experience the smells, the sounds, the tastes, the touch, the emotions of what's going on at the point that the photo is being taken. So a huge amount of photography is in learning to find ways to imply all these other aspects of what was going on, even though they are actually literally inaccessible through the photo. So this notion that the photo somehow camera never lies, photo is representing the truth, is, insert expletive here, it doesn't work. It's not, the camera is incapable of telling the truth as we experience truth. We experience truth through time with all these multiple sensory and spatial and dimensional experiences that the camera just cannot give us. Does that make it worthless? Absolutely not. All forms of art, painting, drawings, sketches, abstracts come in 2 dimensions, which can create deep emotional experiences, connections, memories, thought processes, philosophical ideas, political ideologies. All these kind of things can happen from a 2-dimensional image. So, not worthless. But what it does mean is that if we, as photographers, are trying to convey an idea beyond a 2-dimensional flat image, then we've kind of got our work cut out for us. And the more we understand how the camera is actually representing things and what we can do with what we do with light, what we do with camera angle, what we do with framing, with how we play with the composition, what we can do with the editing, the more we are able to convey all these different ideas or sensory or temporal experiences through the camera. Now, everything I've just said is there for every aspect of photography, but today one of those particular aspects we're talking about is the notion of texture, touch. This notion that you can take something and you can get a sense of what it would feel like if you were to rub your thumb across it. What if you were to lick it? What if you were to stroke it against your cheek? What would the texture actually feel like? And this is what we're going to be talking about today. Well, Meg's joined us and says hello, everyone. So let's, let me do a little bit of desktop rearranging over here so that I can start showing you things on the screen. So, I mean, let's just, if I do that, and do, that. No, that, right. There we go. Right, so here we go, just straightforward sample piece of texture. So, you can probably imagine or see that this is tree bark. Okay, so this is just a quick photo taken with my phone of a tree, but I'm close up against it. We're not getting any real context. And I suppose really context is one of the things that we need to talk about. Because when we are trying to convey an idea, a sense, a mood, a story, and we're capturing an image, context is one of the ways we can convey it. Now, I can convey the notion that this is a tree by standing out a bit and you seeing bits of the trunk or branches coming off it or leaves, and then you've got a better idea that it is a tree. By zooming in a kind of fill the frame near macro level, then you've actually kind of lost the context. So it could be a tree, it could be something else, it could just be a fallen over branch, or it could, you're not really totally sure. But what it does do is it draws our attention to the fact that there is texture. And when we're talking about texture as a topic, particularly with the idea that if you are on these web or on any kind of competition site, like Guru Shots, Photo Crowd, ViewBug, or even maybe your Camera Club or some other sites or something where texture is like the topic of the challenge, then it's about zooming in and the texture becomes the key form of communication that you're trying to get across. Everything has texture, but a texture challenge is about deciding that the texture itself is what takes precedent, what is first and foremost in the picture, is you're conveying that sense of texture. This is important to understand and important to follow, important to remember, because at the end of this podcast, I'm going to be setting the texture challenge for 2 weeks' time. So that's what this podcast is all about, is to give you ideas of how you approach this topic for this challenge, but also for every challenge that you ever decide to go in for, whether it's on one of these online sites or your Camera Club, or just for your own enjoyment, or even if you're doing one of these 30 days of photography or a year photography and the topic comes up. So texture, here we have a texture. So this texture, wooden, dry, bark-like. If we take a different texture, say something like this, then what we're up against is we've got a lemon. Okay, totally different kind of texture. So this slightly glossy, juicy, different colour, different shape. And you know that if you were to run your tongue across this, it would feel completely different than if you ran your tongue across this. Okay, so, VG's joined us and says, hi everyone, from a pleasant, cool evening in Chennai. Welcome, VG. And so, this notion then of what's happening, how do we know when we're looking at a flat screen that this would feel totally different to this? And by and large, it comes down to 2 or 3 different aspects. Well, primarily what it comes down to is light. But the other thing tied in with this is the notion of familiarity. If you're familiar with a lemon, or any kind of citrus fruit, even if you'd never come across a lemon, but you did know what a grapefruit was, or you did know what an orange was, or a lime, then you could kind of do a bit of transferable thoughts. And you go, well, okay, that reminds me a bit of, I imagine the texture would be fairly similar. You might not know what the taste would be, but you can see from the way the light falls that it gives you a particular kind of texture. Oh yes, there she is. Your topic, says April. Yes, yes. VG's having just joined us, VG being the one who's chosen the topic of texture. So let's give you a little sense here. So this is a holly leaf. It's a brand of holly, which species of holly that doesn't have the spiky bits that you normally associate with Christmas, but it is still holly. But this is just a little holly leaf, or 2 holly leaves, and one is turned over and one is straight on, and they're sitting on a piece of paper lit by window light. Okay. Now, what we can see here is that we recognize that this lower one here is the top of the leaf, and the higher one up here is the underside of the leaf. And as well as being different shades of green, the top one is shinier. Okay, so we know by looking at this that it would have a certain slightly smoother, shinier kind of feel to it, whereas the upper one is more matte, is drier. Well, I mean, they're both dry, but it doesn't have that shiny gloss that you feel that there would be a fraction more drag potentially on your finger. You know that would feel slightly different than the shinier, smoother one. Even though it's not particularly smooth, the shininess gives this sort of feeling of your thumb would slide over it more easily. On top of that, though, these are sitting on a piece of paper, and actually it's the back of a large envelope. And the envelope itself has texture, and we can see there's a fold here, and we can see that there's grain in the texture of the paper. So although it's a fairly smooth paper, when we zoom right in, there's a texture to the paper. And then we have a different texture for the back of the leaf, and then we have a different texture for the top of the leaf. Excuse me, I'm quite a dry throat today. Oh, Janet joins us from a from a snowy Barrie in Ontario train station. All right, sitting on the train station. Okay. Hope you don't get too cold, or with a bit of luck, you're sitting in a warmer room if it's snowy outside. So what's giving us this sense then of that one of them might be slightly shinier and one of them might be slightly more matte, and the fact that the paper has folds and grain within it, and it's essentially all about light. So there's the notion of familiarity. If we know what something is already, then we can look at it like the lemon. We can look at the lemon and we can have a sense of what that lemon would look, not only what it would look like, but what it might smell like and taste like. Although if we'd never come across it before, we wouldn't have those. But the quality of the light is telling us something. The quality of the light is, in this, is telling us that there's a juiciness, that there's a dampness to it. The quality of light is telling us that there's a shininess to this side and a matte quality to the other side. But it's also the other side notion, apart from sort of how shiny it is or how dull it is the notion of depth of shadow. Okay, so the depth of shadow, where the light is falling. So we can see here that because of the crease, the way the light is hitting here, we can see the crease. If that light was at a slightly different angle, we wouldn't necessarily see the crease, and as such wouldn't have such a great sense of what the texture is. And this is an important aspect of the photography that we're talking about, of the way that light is crucial to how we actually portray the texture that is in front of us, that we're trying to get across to the viewer. Oh, Janet says she is inside the building. Made me late for the podcast. You're here now though, Janet, which is great. So to explain, to give you an example then of just how much light and the angle of the light and the quality of the light makes to the texture, I'm going to show you a picture of a stone carving. So many years ago, 30 plus years ago, I used to mess around with a little bit of stone carving. Not done it for a long while, but out in the garden, we've got this large lump of sandstone, big heavy chunk of sandstone, which I did a little bit of carving into. And what I did was I carved a sort of Celtic seahorse design into it. Now, basically from here, it's really difficult to make it out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a series of photos I took of this, which is from the same angle, but just as I move it round into the sun or under different lighting conditions. And in this one, if you look at the shadow down here, you can see that the light is behind it. So the only thing that's lighting up this is reflected all around light. And because the light is reflected, it's not really coming from any one angle or another. And it's meaning that the shadows, the depth of where the carving isn't really showing up very well. You can sort of make out bits. So if we move in, you can kind of, there's like a head here, and there's maybe a bit of a mane there. Perhaps you can see something over on the right. There's a little bit of kind of not worky, Celtic-y stuff down here, but it's not very clear. It really isn't very clear at all. Okay, so the next thing I do is I lay it down flat. Okay, so I've laid it down flat and the sun's coming down from above. Again, it's not absolutely overhead. We're not equatorial here, but it's fairly high up. And you can see the shadow going off now to the right. And now it's being lit from down here. We can see other bits of it. We're still not making out everything that clearly because the sun is, but there's some lines here which are slightly deeper. So we're getting a little bit more here, getting bits over here. It's not giving us, it's giving us a bit more, but not huge amounts. Then I put it straight on, face on to the sun. So I stood it back up. Now it's direct. You can see, just about see, the shadow is behind it. And what's happening now is the sunlight, the shadow is coming from directly above. Okay, so the sun forward, but above and coming down here. And what that's meaning is the underside of wherever it's been carved has now become deeper. So you can see like the underside of the horse's heads here, you can make out the lids a little bit more, but some of it like here, you're really not seeing anything much. And again, so what we're getting is we're sort of piecing bits together. Okay, so that, we're not seeing anything. But now what happens is if I put the sun side on to it, and we're getting a different sense again. Where the sun is cutting into here, we're starting to notice a different sense of the carve, the grooves that have gone into the stone. However, this bit, which is set slightly further back, we've lost bits more. Again, we're getting some, we're not getting all. But now look at this one. I've turned it and we're getting enough side light coming down from above and to the left, and we've now pretty much got the whole thing, and it leaps out. Okay, absolutely leaps out. Now we can really clearly see we've got the facing horses with hooves coming up. We've got the manes on either side. They come down into these kind of fishtails, and then there's this Celtic knot in the middle. So this is an old Celtic design, and I've carved it into the sandstone, and now you can see it. Okay, and you can see it really clearly. You get a real sense now of the depth of the carving, how deep the grooves are. Then this is moved into the shadow. Okay, so it's just kind of ambient light. There's no light coming directly on it from any direction. And we can see it. We can still see the horses like we did with the last one, but we're not getting the same sense of depth that we had with this one. So it's the same image, but here it is so much clearer. Here you can see bits of it. Here you can see other bits of it. Here, little bits of it. Here you can barely make it out at all. Okay, so hopefully then this becomes a really clear demonstration of what difference it makes, the light and the light source you've got and the direction the light is coming from, and how far round it is for the amount of texture that it's picking up. Okay, So I hope that's really starting to make things a little bit clearer. Susan says, stone carving, your talents are never ending, Kim. Well, yeah, I don't do it. I haven't done it for over 30 years. But yes, it was one of those things I did. Well, it's one of those, a piece of sandstone is very soft. And I remember going around to a friend's house once and he was doing some stone carving and he showed me this, piece of sandstone which had a Celtic knot, and it looked like it had come off a church 1,000 years old. But he'd done it that afternoon with a bent nail, scratching it into a piece of stone. And so that set me off on a little phase for a couple of years where I was using old screwdrivers and bits of sandstone I could find, and I did various little bits of carving. But like I say, I haven't done it for a long time. However, tangent aside, hopefully though, this is kind of giving you a slight demonstration of how the light source becomes really important. Okay, so the thing is about, what's that? April says, oh, really does make a difference. Excellent. So the thing, part of the thing here is though, I mean, just to do a quick notion about photography with portraiture. Okay, and the way that you can light someone. We've talked, for anybody who can remember, whether you can remember or you want to go back out and check previous episodes where I've talked more in depth about portraiture, the kind of lighting you set up can have a huge difference. So there's the notion of, if you do butterfly lighting, where you have a large light here and a large light here, maybe even a reflector down below, you create this wall of light, essentially where there's nowhere for the shadows to hide. And as such, the wrinkles, just like the grooves in the stone carving, fade back and aren't really noticeable. And depending on the initial age of the person, you can knock 5, maybe even 10 years off someone by having really soft, gentle, all-round lighting. However, if you do a hard light from the side, single light source, and you get that angle right, and you you sort of essentially do to someone's face, like what I've done to the carving here, then what it does is it shows up, it creates all the lines and the wrinkles, the crevices become much deeper, and essentially you can add 5 to 10 years to someone. Now what it does is it really enhances the character of a face. And whenever I do that kind of thing with portraiture, everybody loves it except the person I've taken the photo of. Because everybody themselves thinks of themselves as being younger than they actually are, wants to look at themselves younger than they are, and they don't overly tend to like it. But everybody else loves those full kind of characters. So if you're trying to create a character portrait, then to have a single light source from the side is the one that will enhance the character, the landscape of the face. Now, you can also do this in your editing as well. So if we take, for example, I'm going to show you, I don't want to do this with anybody else's face, so I'll just do it with one of mine. And in fact, I'll do it with a younger one of mine. So here we have a photo of me taken back in 2018. My gosh. Okay, so this is 8 years old, or 7.5 years old, this photo. As you can see, my beard wasn't quite so grey, I had more hair and it was darker and thicker and all the rest of it, and skin maybe not quite as, so here we then have basic photo. There's a soft light coming from the side, there's another light at the background, there's a white bit, so there's a bit of shadow on the right, but it's a fairly soft light. So although we can see the wrinkles on the forehead and we can see some of the pores in the skin, they're not that dramatic, okay? And certainly compared to the face that I have now, it looks young. Although at the time I looked at it, I thought it looked quite old. Now, if I open this into Photoshop, what we can do is if I go to, if we enhance, to go back to this notion, if we enhance the shadows, we will make the face look older, or we will give it more character. So quite simply, let's duplicate that layer. If I go to Filter, Camera Raw, we've got our image up here, and now I can go to the light, I can play with the contrast. That's playing with the big shadows, not doing quite so much, but we have here in the effects, texture and clarity. And if I zoom in a little bit here, and I take the clarity tool, then we can see that it really kind of pushes up the pores. The texture does it too, but on a much finer level. So I can boost the texture like that. I can boost the clarity like that. It is darkening the shadows a lot. Oh, you're making everything maybe a bit too black. So if I just lighten the shadows a fraction, go back to the effects, maybe boost that clarity a little bit more, and maybe just take the exposure up a touch, click OK. And now what we can see is the face. This looks positively blurry. This looks soft focus almost by comparison. This now looks much harder. The skin looks slightly more leathery. You don't feel it would be as smooth if you were to run your finger over the skin or brush your cheek up against it if we were getting close. So you can manipulate that sense of the texture in the editing, especially with the texture and the clarity sliders. You'll notice the hair as well. The hair now seems harder, more wiry, as opposed to, you know, the beard itself here. Look, that even the hair itself looks harder, as opposed to here it looks like it might be slightly softer. So this notion then of the depth of shadow is making a difference to our sense of what the texture is doing. And we can do that with portraiture, but also if we want to enhance it a little bit with something else that we photographed, then we can do so as well. So let me just close that. So hopefully then this is starting to give you a sense of how we can play around with the texture. If you have any thoughts, by the way, just throw them into the comments. Keep the chat going, certainly if you have any questions as well. Okay, let's sort of show then a slightly more real life example. Another example then of how texture can change, where you can look. So last year, out on my wanders with my phone, came across a magnolia plant, and I photographed it at different stages. So here we go with where what I've got is the light is coming down from the side and the flower hasn't come out yet. We've still got its, can't think of the word, I was going to say crust, but almost like cocoon, the seed kind of a bit around it, which is furry, fluffy. And you can see because the light is coming from the side, it's showing up all the individual hairs. We're getting that contrast and you can feel the sort of fluffiness, hairiness of magnolia buds. Okay. Then we get to the next stage about a week later, where it's now breaking open and coming out of this hairy magnolia bud. We've now got a much smoother, silkier kind of flower petal making its way out. And what becomes interesting here, another thing to take note of when you're thinking about texture, if you're photographing, there's this notion of the single texture, or there's the notion of the texture in contrast with another texture. Okay, so in some ways what happens is the hairy fluffiness of the cocoon part actually emphasizes the smooth silkiness of the petals, and vice versa. Okay, we move forward another few days and now it's really pushing out and the petals are starting to open, and the way the light is coming into the petals, there's a softness and you really get that silky feeling, but also emphasized here by another bit that hasn't really opened up much, but it's still, we've got that kind of hairy furry feel next to the soft silkiness. Oh, Vijay says, looks like a textured banana. I guess it does. I don't think I've ever seen the hairy banana as such, but hey. And then we get to this point whereby the magnolias are now, they're full out, the flower is in bloom. I've got the light coming behind it, and because the light's coming behind it, we now got that whole translucent sense as well, which is also giving us a sense of the texture, of the thickness of the leaf, the fact that light can pass through it, that it's sort of translucent, is giving us another clue as to what it might look like or feel like. Okay, different flower is this one's a peony, and this one has got a very soft kind of gentle feel to it. Oh, Viji says, wow, flower is beautiful. I think it's referring to magnolia there. And if you come in really close to the peony, and what we're doing here is not just close up, but we've then got a narrow depth of focus, kind of more macro lens, and that narrow depth of focus is creating more blur. We've only got part of it is sharp, and then the rest of it is drifting out of focus, and that level of blur is actually contributing to the softness of it. And again, because there's no deep hard shadow, there's no blacks in this part, it's just running through from pale pink to deeper pinks, with maybe a hint of yellow where the stamens are, then it adds that whole sense of softness. And you get the feeling that, again, if you were to take this and you were just to stroke it very lightly on the side of your cheek, it would feel very different to even this one, and certainly to something like that. So this notion then of how it would feel on your face, on your fingers, or even if you were to lick it, on your tongue. In fact, actually, it's an interesting one with the tongue, because the tongue is essentially a touch magnifying glass. Okay, the tongue has loads of sensors all over it, way more than your fingertips. And as such, you can make out massive amounts more deep. Little babies constantly put things in their mouth because they can make more sense of stuff by the tongue. We also know when running our tongue around our teeth, or if we have a little filling, or we have little chips come out of our tooth, it feels huge, it feels massive compared to what it actually looks like. So our tongue massively magnifies what it is, but that sense of touch. And it's one of those interesting things that you can kind of look at a picture of something and imagine licking it, even if it's something you would never lick. It could be just a piece of rust, but that you would have a much more detailed sense of what it would feel like via your tongue than via your fingertips. And of course, your fingertips have far more sensory nerve endings on them than, say, your elbow. So if you were to run your elbow across something, you're not going to be able to make out too much of what the texture is like. You'll get more texture if you run your fingertips, and even more texture if you were to run your tongue over it. Like, not everything is hygienic. Don't recommend it for everything. Viji says, what was it? Close-up shot is beautiful, fills the frame. Yes. So that notion again, fill the frame, becomes one of those things that if you are really wanting to emphasize the texture, then getting in close macro shots, fill the frame shots are really quite a good way of doing it. Okay, let's run through another series of how a texture can change through time. So if we take a look at this tulip, so this tulip has kind of just come out, and we can see from the way the light is reflecting off it that it's new, it's shiny, it would feel soft. The petals would feel soft under the hand, under the fingers. Okay, and there's a freshness to it. That quality of the reflected light really gives us that sense of that shiny tulip feel, as opposed to this one here, which is where the tulip has gone past, so it's dead, it's dying now. Okay, so and the petals are starting to dry out, and some of these petals, this one here is still a bit soft, but not so much. Oh, Lisa's joined us, says hello all. Glad you could join us, Lisa. Whereas it's really starting to dry out on some of these central ones here, and it's not just drying out, it's losing the colour as well. So the texture has changed considerably from this, which has this silky new feel to it, to this, which is starting to get a drier, rougher, older feel. Take this, come back a week later, and it's really started to shrivel up. A lot of the colour has gone, and you just know that this is starting to, this bit is going to feel drier even than this. This bit's got a slight little bit of sheen on it. Maybe it would still have a touch of softness, whereas the bit above is probably lost that. And then you come back a couple of weeks later after that, and it's lost all colour. It's barely a kind of like bleached out bones, like a skeleton kind of thing. The petals have no colour left in them. They have no life left in them. It's rough. So that sense then of just following even the same plant, even you take something like a tulip and you can follow it through different stages and the texture changes in each one of these. And that notion of dead plants, dried plants is, it's an age-old still life. I mean, Susan will, I'm sure, will have plenty of pictures of still life. In fact, actually, she's talked before about certain flowers and leaves which she collects during the years, maybe through the year, presses dry or dries out, and then uses for still life. You take something like, in fact, actually, what did Susan say? Yeah, Susan says, always keep tulips. They're fabulous for photography when they dried up. Yeah. This one, a dried hydrangea, out for a walk again, quick photo, light was coming through it. This then is the photo I used for the cover card for this one, because again, you've got a sense of texture. You've got the light coming through here. You can see all the veins of the petals. You know, when we look down here, you start to see the ridges of those. And even over here where it's become skeletal, where the part of the bit in between the ridges has started to break off and disappear. We're getting gaps in it as well. So there's sort of multiple layers of levels of texture and what have you. And again, so what VG says backlight's amazing. And it is. So where the light is falling is going to emphasize different aspects of the texture. So if you are trying to emphasize a particular texture, this comes back to this idea that your light source and your light direction is absolutely crucial. Then there's that notion, I mean, to go back to that notion of the macro, here's another leaf, but with this one, it's got the frost on it. And what the frost has done is there's more frost on the ridges than there is on the bits in between the ridges. And as such, that's kind of enhanced that sense of the texture again. So there's, and because we've done a macro lens on this, we're starting to see, we can practically make out all the little individual frost crystals. So you know then that this would have that, if you were to run your finger or your tongue across it, you would get a very rough feel to it. And again, if we go back to the flower, nice soft sweet pea, lovely, fresh, soft, silky, you would be very smooth on the cheek. Also, if anybody knows the sweet pea, gorgeous smell. But again, likewise, the smell you're not going to know unless you're already familiar with it. But on a wet day, texture has changed. Okay, we've still got the softness of the leaf, of the petal, but we've now got all these water drops over it. Okay, that changes the texture quite considerably. And it's worth remembering then actually that you can play, and of course, again, Susan's talked about this when she does her still life with her flowers and what have you, to going out with a little spray bottle, because the water droplets change the way the light is falling onto petals. And the texture then becomes far different when you've got all these, it's going to be wet if you touch it. Oh, I hadn't actually noticed there's a little kind of green fly type or weevil of some kind sitting on the plant. In fact, there's another one. Here you go. Infested. I had no idea. Not noticed that on the... could be another one in there. I wonder if the owner of these sweet peas knew. It's not from our garden, this. John says, I like the frost photo. It really is all about the light. And April says, love the water drops on the flowers. So you can start to see then that we're really getting this this notion of texture. Here's a fun one. Now here what we've got is we've got a larch, I think it is, with the cones and the stick, except for the fact that they are then covered in lichen. So the larch cone itself would have also has this interesting woody texture, the cone's texture. But then you've got all these lichens, and if you know lichens and I don't, you will probably talk about multiple different, it looks like different species of lichen. There's a paler green up here, there's a darker green here, there's these ones which look more like kind of sort of trumpets or mouths or suckers, maybe, with a yellow tint to them. So there's at least, and then that's kind of yellow, whereas that's a darker green. I would say there's at least 4 different lichens that I can see on here itself. And the cone virtually hidden by it, although up in the top left, right corner, hidden behind my part, we've got another cone which doesn't have as much lichen. on it as well. So VG says, well, loving the yellow patches, looks like coral, like a coral reef on land. You know, it does. It's got that kind of feel to it, doesn't it? With all that kind of coral. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. So this notion of textures on top of textures is an interesting one. I mean, if you, again, this is a very old sign, so a footpath sign up on the Yorkshire moors, and it's wood, and you've got the footpath carved into it. And if you think back to the stone carving, you're seeing it because the light is coming at a particular angle. On a different angle, the depth of the groove wouldn't be quite so strong. But it just feels so dry, all the cracks in the wood. It's got a very dried old wood feel to it. And then it's got lichen on it, again, different kind of lichen. And that lichen also feels hard and prickly. You know, again, you know that if you were to touch it, it would feel rough. It wouldn't feel soft and moist like even this lichen, especially the stuff with like the little kind of suckers on it, feels like it might be sort of slightly softer and rubbery. I mean, these bits here have got a very kind of rubbery feel to them, or look to them, even if they wouldn't feel. Whereas this feels like hard, dry lichen. On top of that, we've got the textures. We've got all these nails and rusty staples, and clearly what's happened, this has been a post which has had a lot of things stuck to it over the years. Might be that whenever there's a kind of a group going out hiking, that signposts are put, or little posters or stickers or bits of paper are being hammered in, stuck, pinned, stapled to this post to let that particular group know that they're supposed to follow this way or go off the other way, all that kind of stuff. So an old post like this ends up full of texture. There's the texture of the wood, but then also things like the rusty nail hammered into it as well, and the lichens that are going across it. So again, this something like this, although it's primarily, you call it it's a signpost, it's just texture is oozing from it. It's really all about the texture. Another wooden post, and a very wet wooden post, is this one. So this is a fence post, just a little bit of walk that I go on, where the top has started to rot away, and then mosses have started growing inside it. And so we have almost like this miniature garden. I mean, the fence post itself is about this big, maybe 3 inches, 4 inches max thick, 4x4 thickness potentially. I've again just got the phone, gone in close. But now, as opposed to the completely dried out wood feel of this wood has a completely soaking, rotting sense to it. You could touch it, your fingers would be damp. The softness of the moss here as well, you're getting that damp green moss and the wet rotting wood. And that sense then of how do we know something's so wet as opposed to so dry? And it's to do with the reflective quality of the way the light is bouncing off the surface. And again, getting in close is one of the ways we're really able to show that. If we stood back a bit, you would see the post. You might even know that it was a wet post, but you're not going to really get out a sense of the detail in such the same way. April says pretty moss, another world for miniature people. Yes, you could get a little Lego man, I guess, and stick them in there. Now, here's what I want to talk about with this one. So here's a lump of ice. But actually, I put this one up on my Instagram page, my phone pics Instagram page last night, I think. So this is a couple of days ago when the loch was still frozen down at the bottom of town. And I went down there and the ice was about 1.5 inches thick, maybe. But it was right up against the edge of the loch where, it started to melt, and there was some cracks, and there was a bit, and I pulled it up. And so we ended up with a sort of bit of ice floating in it. And now we've got the light, and I've moved around with the phone, got the light behind it. And what we can see in the background, we've got the frozen loch, a little bit of landscape, the far side of the loch over here out of focus. We've got the frozen loch in the background. We've got a little bit of where it's broken, and we've got the water coming through here. All the light is bouncing off the ice, but the light is coming through the ice. And so we've got all these little trapped air bubbles within it. It's all wrinkled underneath. And it's an interesting one, this, because you have to, again, to understand that it's ice, you need the texture, you need the context, rather. The context of, and the fact that you can kind of make out that it looks like a frozen lock in the background is giving you the sense that this is ice, rather than, say, a block of glass. Because there are certain things which, when you've got, it's like, especially when you've got reflective surfaces. I mean, we play with the idea, say, with a lock that's really still, which is giving a mirror-like reflection, to the fact that it looks like glass. It stops looking like water. And so there are some things which look like other things under certain circumstances. You get a different sense of the idea of what the actual texture is, or rather what the texture is from. So the texture isn't necessarily always going to tell you exactly what it is. So having the context of the bit of frozen lock is what allows us to know that this is the ice. Okay. What's that say? Susan says, gorgeous bokeh in your ice image. Yeah, it did work out quite well, that, but down to this. Put the camera on 2x zoom, and then move in a bit, and that helps kind of blur everything else out in the background. So, right, okay. While I take a breather for a moment, maybe a quick point to turn around and say, if you're enjoying these podcasts and you find them useful, interesting, you'd like to support them in some way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, don't forget to invite your friends as well. Next week also, I'll talk again about this later, but we'll be having a feedback session. If you're wanting to send in images, you're wanting to send me questions even, but you're wanting feedback, you're putting stuff in for challenges, then this one here, Kim Ayres podcast@gmail.com is the place to send everything as well. But we also have the Facebook group. The Flickr group is sort of still not really doing much, but certainly the Facebook group is quite active, reasonably active. And buy me a coffee, all that kind of stuff. So keep that one in mind. Right. Okay. So where are we at then? So we're still talking about this notion of texture. Then there's the notion of man-made textures as well. So far I've been showing you all sorts of things in nature, well, I suppose apart from the fence post, but as well as where are we? There's the man-made. A quick thing about black and white as well. So here what we've got is we've got a willow basket or willow platter, really. And interestingly with this, when you put it into black and white, we remove the colour, then it becomes the light and shadow is what it's all about. Okay, so not every photo works like this, but sometimes the texture can be enhanced by the removing of the colour. So you end up with this sort of texture, but without the colour. And again, you've got to have the light. The light coming from one side is allowing the shadow to show. Again, this notion of the macro, the really close up, this is threads. This is actually sewing. I thought it was a ball of wool, but actually I've suddenly remembered it's a little ball of sewing threads. But what I did with that was, this one was taken on the phone, excuse me one sec, with my old friend, the loop. So the jeweler's loop, phone, stuck over it. Gives me 30 times magnification, and I was able to get into some sewing threads, and you really get all these little threads coming out, and you really get a strong sense of the texture. So again, within texture, not always, but sometimes getting in there with a macro lens, magnifying glasses and what have you, and really filling up the frame is one of the good ways of getting across, especially if the texture can be quite subtle otherwise. Now, something like this, again, close-up macro shot of a leather satchel. And, again, we're getting that set, because the light this is just near the window light's coming in. It's enabling all of the tiny little ridges pores in the leather, skin of the leather and what have you, to sort of show against the metal buckle little wrinkles, and it really becomes, you can feel that leather. You can get a real sense of, you know what it's like to kind of try and push this strap through the buckle, to feel that little metal bit of buckle. If you, and anybody who had a satchel at school, these days they're all zipped up, but nice little, yeah. Oh yeah, Susan says, like my old school satchel, I can smell it. And yes, you can actually sort of stick your nose into this and get that kind of leathery smell out of it. It's a fun little satchel. So again, that getting in close. 1 penny. Okay, so coins, again, done with a macro lens, this one, and metallic. And with the macro lens, you can then really see all the tiny little scratches into the metal as well. Slightly older looking penny. No idea how old this one is. I can't remember what, but it would say on the back. But I mean, a penny is only this big, it's only, a couple of centimeters or centimeter. I can't remember exactly what the size is, but it's, not very big. But getting with a macro lens, and it's metallic. We know it's metallic. And you also know the feel of, holding a penny, holding a coin, that little bit of roughness. It's not a complete smooth disc. The indentations of, in this case, the portcullis and the crown and the 1 penny. Now, here's another metal surface. It's a sundial, but it's wet. This is a sundial after it's been raining. Okay, so again, we're talking about that notion here of there's a reflective quality, which isn't just, there's a reflective quality in the penny, but somehow that penny is dry. Whereas this sundial is also metallic and has a couple of little indentations where it's been carved, whether it's north and northeast, and the clock numbers here, but it's wet. There's a different quality to the reflection, the reflective quality in the metal. So the texture's really kind of showing up much more here. And that notion of metal and reflection, sometimes, of course, you can have something really reflective. So in this case, this is the front of a Bentley, an old vintage Bentley. There was a car vintage parade thing going on in the car park, literally across the road. There were a whole bunch of vintage cars. I nipped across, and here we can see my reflection, very distorted, holding my phone up to get a shot of the Bentley insignia symbol on the front there, but also the reflection of me in it as well. And the way that the reflection is distorting my image gives you a sense of the curvature of the metal. So the metal is so shiny, it is mirror-like, but you also get a sense, because it's mirror-like, you also get a sense of that it's probably quite smooth to the touch. Now, there might be some tiny little indentations, and we can start to see slight little dents and scratches within it, but by and large, it will be fairly smooth in that kind of metallic way. Another little bit of texture. Again, playing around, out for a walk, cows coming over to see what I'm like. I've got my phone up. It gets closer and closer and closer as I go click. And the texture then here of the nose and that slight shine on it there. And again, what it would feel like. Now, you maybe wouldn't want to touch it. You might be repulsed by it. You might find it interesting. I've also got the hair coming out, the whiskers, of the cow, but that really does, all these little indentations and that slight shine and the furriness and the contrast between the nose and the side cheeks really does have, texture is everything about this. You practically pull back because you're waiting for it to just sort of come up and sort of, press against your face, or, even worse, lick your face or something like that. Similarly, dog here as well. Another one, dog rather close. Again, same kind, almost exactly the same kind of all these little sensitive indentations into the nose with the fur and the hair just on the outside and a little bit of some kind of whiskery fur around it. So the texture is a really important part of these photos. But to talk then about the notion of contrast again. So here we have some wet moss, and you can see again the wet touch, April says she loves the cow's nose also. So this wet moss here against the hard brickwork. Okay, so that notion then, what here is very much about the texture, but it's again contrast of texture. And of course, no texture podcast would be complete without the idea of peeling paint. One of the first, so many of us, when we first pick up a camera and we start looking around for something interesting, peeling paint is something which it just kind of, it's a universal we have to sort of find. And now this is peeling paint on wood, and we can see that it's on wood. There's a whole quality to it. There's a dried out quality to the wood in the same way there was with that fence post, where we can see the paint and the paint peeling off. But we can also go for, again, that macro shot here where we've got layers of peeling paint on a rusty fence post, a metal fence, this one. And here is one where it's just multiple layers, so we can zoom right in, and we've got the flaky rust here, then we've got the flaky green paint, then we've got the flaky black paint. Other bits of it looks like sort of some kind of mold or lichen or something starting to grow inside a rusty patch under, taking refuge under the paintwork here. And even it looks like, even little bits of spider web as well. So multiple texture on this. And again, I always think it's funny. It's like, you would never lick this, but you know what it would feel like if you did. And I do find that I saw some meme doing the rounds a year or two ago on Facebook, and it was something about like a whole bunch of different texture photos, and it would say, and none of them would you ever lick, but it said, you know what it would feel like if you were to lick it. Somehow the tongue knows. It was quite amusing in its place, but it does keep kind of coming to me that you could look at this, you know what it would feel like on your tongue, even though you would never actually do it. And you may never have licked rusty paintwork, but somehow you know. And so if we're talking about that, how do you know you're kind of conveying the texture? You could almost say that, if somebody could imagine what it would feel like if they were to lick it, then you've managed to convey that sense of what the texture is doing. VG says she loves the beautiful brick wall and the moss, and also it looks like a cobweb is holding the layers of peeled paint together. Yes, there's bits of that going on for sure. Or this, again, another, here we've got much more of the gate, or a slightly different gate a bit further along the road, different layers of paint, different depths of rust, again, lichens and what have you growing in the little gaps where the rust and the paint kind of come together. So it's all about the texture. Here, again, we've got metal, we've now got dust, we've got cobwebs, we've got dried leaves. Everything about this just feels old, decayed, but so full and rich of texture. But texture doesn't have to be peeled paint. It can also be, this, the sheep here, you can practically smell the damp wool in all that. So hopefully then, all this has given you a sense of that notion of texture. So to kind of sum up then what we're talking about with texture, when we have a photo which is dedicated to the idea of texture, then the texture is what's taking front stage. It's first and foremost, it's about how it feels, how it would feel to the touch, whether you were touching it with your thumb, whether you were rubbing it against the side of your face, or whether you were licking it. How would that feel? And if the photo is primarily about texture, then that is what you are trying to convey. And the way we convey that is primarily through light and familiarity. So familiarity is about, does somebody recognize what it is? Can they impose their own memory of what it is they're looking at? So when we look at a picture of a lemon, we know what a lemon looks like, smells like, feels like, tastes like. So it makes it easier to convey that sense of what the pith or the inside of the lemon might feel like. But then it's about the quality of the light, and the way the light is reflecting off a surface tells us how wet or juicy or smooth or silky it is. And then it's about the depth of the shadow, which tells us how deep the grooves are and likely how hard or sharp it might, or rough it might feel on the skin. But we can be kidded. We can be fooled by it. A piece of ice can look like a piece of glass. There's a woman in Kakubri who specialises in making fake food. So she makes foods for props, for movies, TV, and that kind of stuff. So if you've got an ice cream, for example, in your TV program, and it's under hot lights, it's going to melt very quickly. And if it needs to sort of sit there for an hour or two while multiple shots are being made, then having a real ice cream isn't going to work. Now, she will make an ice cream, but it's made out of clay. It's made out of resins. It's made out of bits of rubber, it's made out and painted. And she uses all sorts of different materials to create something which looks exactly like an ice cream. You genuinely feel if you went up and licked it, it would be cool, it would be tasty. But actually, if you were to lick it, it would be paint on a piece of clay or wood or resin. So it's kidding you as to what it is. But sometimes there's also, I remember the first time I ever held a snake. I was a teenager. And I'd never held a snake before. When you look at a snake, it's got that slightly shiny, glistening kind of side on it. And I genuinely thought it was going to be slimy. I thought it was going to be like holding a fish. The scales on it would be like fish scales. And then to my utter surprise, it felt leathery. I really expected that snake to feel like a fish, but it didn't. It felt leathery instead. So because I'd never held a snake before, I didn't have that memory or that sense of recognition to be able to impose the idea that I was going to get the right kind of texture. So it's never a guarantee. There are illusions, there are misunderstandings, bits of misinformation. But by and large, what we're doing with our camera then is we are trying to convey that sense of texture, that sense of softness, silkiness, roughness, hardness, wetness, all these different senses of texture. We're trying to, how do we convey that to the viewer? So within this then, for 2 weeks' time, I am setting the texture challenge. So now, hopefully, you've all been listening to this and it's going to be here on YouTube, episode 273. You can come back and find it at any time this week or at any point in the future, and remind yourselves about how to convey the idea of texture. So whether it's for this texture challenge or whether in 3 months' time you decide to enter a texture challenge on ViewBug or the Photo Crowd, or your local camera club decides to do something on texture. So your key thing is to understand that if you are trying to promote texture, that the texture is the primary thing that's in the photo. Now, you might want to do something like some kind of macro close-up, fill the frame, or you might want to have it but in a comparison to, so you've got a hard texture next to a soft texture, a wet texture next to a dry texture, something which is giving you that kind of cross comparison. Or you might decide that you need context as well. So you've got other items in it in order to make sure that that texture is really, so we know what it is that we're looking at. Or maybe you just want to go a bit abstract with it as well. You certainly have a bit of fun like that too. What else have we got? Okay, so yeah, Vici says, thank you, Kim. Got some ideas and looking forward. Excellent. Nicola says, really helpful, Kim. Thank you. Susan says, it's going to be all about our observational skills too, I think. Vici says, I'm really going to have a nightmare about a snake. One thing I'm scared of is snake. Okay, you don't have to do snake textures. The thing is that everything has a texture. Everything has a texture. If we can touch it, it has a texture. Even glass, which we can see right through, has a texture. The question is which texture do you say? What object are you going to find, or what objects are you going to find? What texture do you want to convey? Do you want to convey something smooth, something harsh, something powdery? There's so many different ways you can do it, but it's try and do it in a way that is maybe interesting to the observer. Okay, that's the kind of key thing. What's going to make the observer pause for a little bit longer and go, ooh, ooh, that looks kind of fun. Or probably in the case of most people watching this, of, ooh, I wonder how I would get that photo. Okay, that's because that's what we're doing here. We're sharing our different approaches to the subject. April's saying, laughing VG's comment and saying, we've got to think about something calming and pretty. Yes, plenty of pretty flowers you could do a picture of. Or no doubt, I've also set some of your pictures, VG, where you've actually got your spices or your coloured flour and stuff like that. You know, there's textures to be had in amongst those, as well as the metallic oil containers and bowls and lamps, the silks, your saris. You know, there's so many different things which can be. Again, you can decide whether you want to go richly colourful or whether you want to remove the colour and actually just concentrate more in a kind of black and white or a monotone in order to emphasise the texture and not be distracted by the colour. See, sometimes the colour can enhance the texture, sometimes the colour can distract from the texture. And depending on what you're photographing and how you're photographing it will make that difference. So something else to keep in mind. Right, so that's in 2 weeks' time. So today is the 11th, so that will be the 24th, 25th. So January the 25th is where we will have the texture challenge. So by Friday, January the 23rd, try and get your image to me. Send it to the Ayres podcast at Gmail. You can send it to me the usual ways, or you can stick it in the Facebook group. As usual, it's just that, like I said, my normal email address has kind of become overflowing. And so I set up this one specifically for the podcasts. It just makes it easier if you can send it there. But you won't be disqualified if you send it to me in the normal channels. Next week, though, is a feedback session. Okay, so first feedback session of the year. This is your chance to get genuine feedback and help on your photos. What photos have you got where you're going, I'm struggling a little bit with this. I can't quite edit it the way that I want, or I'm not sure I should have taken it this way, or how do I make this a better photo? So send me your images. This is really, truly one of the best ways to improve your photography, is to get feedback on photos that you're slightly less than certain about. Or even if, for that matter, you've got a photo which you feel you really like and has done well, but somehow never does quite as well as you expect it to. You've put it in for the competitions, you put it into the photo crowd and Viewbug and all this kind of stuff, but it's never, doesn't really seem to get any traction. And you kind of get a sense that you're missing something. Whether it's you feel you're missing something, whether it's a photo you know you haven't quite got right, whether you're wanting to know whether things could have been done differently, then let me know. Send it to Ayres podcast at gmail.com. Tell me a little bit about the photo. If you can, send me an unedited version as well as the edited version, and then that gives me more options to play with to come up with a potential solution for you. But yes, I have space for up to a maximum of about 4 images. So I tend to work on a first come, first served, but send me your images for feedback, because it really is the best way to improve your photography. Also, it helps everybody else who's watching, who can then relate to what's going on as well. So feel free to share. Right. Okay. I think that pretty much brings us to the end. Thank you ever so much to VG for suggesting the idea of the texture, and I thank you all for each of you who've turned up, left comments, and are a part of this podcast. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Don't forget to send me your images for feedback. Take care. Bye-bye.